By the third day, I'd already stopped expecting this to be a misunderstanding. That morning, I received my first official fine, $500. Attached to the notice was a photo of Rustam simply standing near the mailbox, doing absolutely nothing wrong. In the image, someone had zoomed in and added a red circle around his head as if it was proof of danger. Below it, in bold text, potential threat, HOA standards violation, hashtag 4.7b. The funny thing, Rustam had been tied inside the barn all day. The photo was old, possibly edited. They weren't just trying to push me out. They were manufacturing reasons. I didn't go online to argue. I didn't complain. I got to work. The thing about Karen and her board was they were proud, loud. They wanted attention, and while they ranted publicly, they forgot about the quiet man with 2 bulls and an engineering degree. I started digging late into the night. I scanned old newsletters, public HOA filings, permit approvals, and community budget allocations. Every penny had a path. But there was one section labeled Future Infrastructure, Smart Climate Systems that felt off. Every quarter, thousands of dollars were funneled into it, but no updates, no completion notices, no audit records. I called a friend Marla, an old colleague who once did consultancy for eco-sustainability projects. I didn't give too many details, just enough to pique her interest. She pulled some local registry info and messaged back within an hour. That system was never certified. Funds are moving into a private LLC called Thermo Haven Inc., owned by guess who? Karen Monroe. Bingo. While they obsessed over bulls, Karen had been draining the neighborhood's reserves into a private venture, hiding it under environmental upgrades no one could verify. That was the moment it all shifted. I could have gone public right away, but what fun is that? I wanted them to feel what they made me feel. Ridiculed, cornered, ignored. So I waited. Meanwhile, they kept escalating. A neighbor named Jeff, who always smiled at me during walks, suddenly put up a for sale sign in his yard. When I asked if he was moving, he wouldn't even make eye contact. Later, I found out Karen had told residents I was running an illegal cattle breeding operation, that the bulls were diseased, dangerous, that if something happened to someone's child, the HOA wouldn't be responsible. I didn't respond, not yet, but I did change the game. That same week, I upgraded the barn's ventilation system, installed temperature regulators and passive heat stabilizers. Karen thought the bulls were my weakness, but in truth, they were my perfect cover, because, next, I'd be tampering with her system. Quietly, legally, without ever leaving my property. All I had to do was test one small device, a pulse reader that disrupted low-band climate control signals, the same kind Thermo Haven used. I activated it at midnight. Nothing obvious happened, just a momentary flicker in the neighborhood's smart lights. A few sprinklers came on unexpectedly, a weird hum from the public HVAC box, and then silence. From inside the barn. I looked out across the street. Karen's house stood perfectly still. I noticed the frost begin to gather along the edges of her rooftop solar panels. I smiled. The bulls weren't a problem anymore. They were bait. By the end of that week, 3 more residents reported sudden heating failures. One said his thermostat kept switching to cooling mode at night. Another posted on the HOA forum that her sprinklers had turned on mid-blizzard, coating her walkway in ice, but no one linked it to me. Not even close. Karen issued an email blast titled Unforeseen Technical Glitches in Smart Climate System. Our engineers are working on it, except there were no engineers. Because there was no real system, only one person owned the entire installation, Karen, and she hadn't installed anything but a cheap automation panel disguised behind smart-looking UI, a system that never worked, but had eaten nearly $92,000 of HOA funds. The residents didn't know it yet, but their winter comfort had been sold for a lie. Inside my garage, I tuned the disruptor again. I wasn't breaking anything. I wasn't even accessing HOA property. I was simply sending passive interference, much like a jamming device for old radios. My device obeyed the law. But the results, they were starting to rattle bones. One night, around 3 a.m., I heard yelling. I stepped onto my porch in silence, wrapped in my coat. Karen stood outside her house, arms flailing as her driveway sensors malfunctioned. The lights blinked on and off in random patterns like some kind of haunted attraction. Her car alarm triggered 3 times before she gave up. Sultan, my quieter bull, let out a low grunt from the barn. Same, I whispered. 2 days later, The HOA called a mandatory emergency meeting, in person, no Zoom. That meant something was going wrong, and they didn't want a digital trail. I showed up. Karen didn't look like herself. Her polished look had faded into a frazzled, overworked panic. Her hair was undone, nails chipped, eyes twitching. She opened with a speech about climate variables and unexpected delays from our software partners. She avoided numbers. She avoided accountability. But one person raised his hand, a quiet man from the corner house. "Mr. Dodd, I've read through the last 6 months of expense summaries," he said plainly. "I can't find a single official invoice for this climate upgrade. Just recurring transfers to a company that no one has ever heard of." Karen paused. "That's confidential vendor data." "No," Dodd replied, "it's our money." The room fell silent. Finally, Karen turned the conversation to an easy scapegoat. She pointed at me. "While we're all here, I believe Mr. Zion's bulls have become a growing concern. Multiple complaints, noise, smells, not to mention a public safety hazard." I stared at her, not angry, just calm. "There's no smell, no noise complaints filed with the county. My animals are licensed, tagged, and inspected. Your bylaws don't classify them as illegal. If they did, you'd have acted already. But they're a risk, like your fake HVAC company." Gasps filled the room. I leaned forward, pulled a printed record from my coat, and laid it on the community table. A public registry report for Thermo Haven LLC, Karen's name, her address, her bank account attached to the HOA. Her mouth moved. No sound came. "It's all public," I added. "Anyone here can verify it." She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. I said quietly, "You pause the fines you're issuing over bulls and start preparing for a state audit." The meeting broke down. People whispered in corners. Karen sat in her chair, shaking. My bulls weren't just animals anymore. They were shields, and behind them, the storm was just getting started. 2 nights after the meeting, Karen installed cameras on every corner of her house. Not standard ones. These had infrared sensors, motion-activated beams, and small red status lights that blinked even when nothing moved. She was watching the neighborhood now, watching everyone, especially me. The community forum, usually full of gardening tips and lost cat alerts, turned into a cold battlefield of suspicion. One resident posted anonymously, "Strange how all this tech failed right after Karen went after the guy with bulls." Another replied, "I just want heat in my bathroom again. Who cares about animals?" Karen tried to regain her grip. She posted lengthy messages about digital terrorism, about how someone may be interfering with community systems, and dropped the words legal action like breadcrumbs. But her tone had changed. She wasn't leading anymore. She was scrambling. The disruptor I'd built didn't need to be on every night. In fact, it ran best in bursts, unpredictable, short pulses that made the system believe it was experiencing internal failures. My favorite test, the streetlights. Every evening, just after sundown, I watched as one street lamp, exactly the one outside Karen's house, flickered 3 times before switching off. No other light did that. She called the county about it. They replaced the bulb. The next day it happened again, and this time, she snapped. It started around 11 p.m. I was inside, drinking tea, writing down patterns in her defense strategy. That's when I heard something outside. Not a loud bang, just a soft metallic sound, like wire being clipped. I walked to the side window. She was in my yard. Karen Monroe, HOA president, self-declared protector of the neighborhood, was crouched near my barn, holding a long object in her hand. Something thin, black. She moved like she didn't want to be seen, but her winter jacket kept catching on the side posts. She was trying to sabotage something. I didn't rush out. I just pressed a button on my phone. The barn's security lights exploded to life, along with a hidden recording speaker I'd installed earlier. Her face, caught in full view, squinted into the brightness, and the recording played. "You are being recorded. This is private property. Step away." She dropped the object, a long rod with barbed prongs, and stumbled backward. I walked out slowly, holding nothing, speaking calmly, looking for something. "Karen." Her eyes were wild, but her voice, still grasping for control, came out clipped. I thought one of your bulls got out. I was checking. They're asleep, like everyone else. You're violating the bylaws. I have every right. You're trespassing." She turned, ran, nearly slipped as her boot hit the frozen patch of grass near the sprinkler grate. I didn't follow. I just let the cameras do the rest. The next morning, I sent a copy of the footage, without commentary, to the HOA board and the neighborhood group. I didn't accuse her. I didn't need to. They did the rest. By noon the next day, the footage had spread like fire through the neighborhood's private WhatsApp groups and email chains. It wasn't just about trespassing anymore. It was about leadership, trust, and fear. Karen had crossed a line. The HOA board, usually silent unless she prompted them, called for an emergency internal vote, not to remove her yet, but to suspend her while an investigation was opened. And for the first time since she took over, the vote didn't go her way. 3 members voted yes, 1 abstained. Only Karen voted no, and she did it from her phone. While holed up inside her house, the suspension was immediate. She lost access to HOA admin tools. The group's email was handed over to Vice President Rahul Batra, a level-headed retired architect who'd always kept his distance from Karen's more aggressive moves. Rahul visited me that same evening. "I don't agree with what she did," he said, standing in my driveway, eyes cast downward, "and I don't think the bulls are a problem." I didn't say anything. I let him talk. But things are fragile right now. There are still people who believe this community needs order. If they feel like it's descending into chaos, it'll backfire on everyone. He handed me a sealed envelope. She submitted a formal noise complaint yesterday. Before the suspension, I opened it. Inside was a single printed sentence. Subject: animals vocalized repeatedly from 1 a.m. to 2:45 a.m., disrupting residential sleep. I handed it back. Sultan and Rustam were both in deep stall rest during those hours, I said. "They have audio monitor collars? Want the logs?" Rahul looked embarrassed. "No. I just wanted you to know what she's doing. She's not done yet." And she wasn't. That night, a post went live on a burner Facebook account with no profile picture. It showed edited clips of me walking with Sultan near the mailbox. Slowed down and distorted, with text over it. "Aggressive livestock in our neighborhood, is your family safe?" But the post backfired. Residents recognized the video angle. It was taken from the HOA's own security pole, which Karen still had access to before her suspension. The post was removed within hours. Still, the damage was done, not to me, but to her. The board called a general assembly for the following weekend. They wanted full transparency, an audit review, a financial breakdown of the mysterious climate upgrade system, and they wanted Karen present. Meanwhile, I made my final preparations. The device I'd built, the passive signal disruptor, had one more feature. Not just interference, but recorded data mapping. Every time Karen's fake system glitched, I had logged the frequency range and pulse signature, and each disruption showed the same flaw. The automation software wasn't connected to any physical grid. It was all simulated responses. In short, a ghost system. Empty, expensive, fraudulent. I printed it all. Not to destroy her, but because I knew she'd try something louder, something public. And if I timed it right, the entire neighborhood would see who she really was. The community center hadn't been this packed in years. Folding chairs lined every wall, people leaned against the back doors, and a low, nervous hum filled the air. No one was here for coffee or raffle tickets this time. This was war. Quiet, neighborly war. I stood near the back, beside Rahul. He looked anxious but resolute. He'd agreed to moderate the assembly. The agenda was simple: discuss the HOA budget discrepancies, address the climate control system, hear from Karen, and finally, vote. When Karen entered, it was like ice rippled through the crowd. She wore her usual cream coat, hair tied up, walking fast, almost too fast, like she was forcing her spine to stay straight. But her eyes gave her away, bloodshot, nervous. The HOA crown was slipping. She didn't greet anyone, just went straight to the front and sat. Rahul began. He gave a short, professional summary of the financial audit, explaining that a large chunk of funds over the last year had gone into a vendor account named Thermohaven LLC, with no corresponding invoices, permits, or inspection records. Then he opened the floor. People didn't hold back. How could we have no heating updates but spend over $90,000? Why were the thermostats rerouted without asking anyone? What is Thermohaven? Why haven't we ever seen proof of its existence? Karen finally stood. "I started Thermohaven," she said, flatly. It was a placeholder company to test climate-friendly options. The plan was to scale up once the system was ready. "Where's the system?" someone shouted. Karen's lip curled. I paused development because we kept getting sabotage attempts. Interference, external tampering. People looked around. Confused, she turned toward me. By him, I raised my eyebrows but said nothing. Karen slammed a folder onto the table. He's been running unauthorized devices from his barn. Signal disruptors. You've all seen your systems glitch. The sprinklers, the lights, the HVAC. That's not my system. That's him ruining it. Your system doesn't exist, I said, calmly. We've seen the grid data. You never installed anything real. Her hands trembled as she flipped through pages of poorly printed images, mostly blurry screenshots of my barn. Nighttime footage, even a thermal scan that clearly came from someone flying a drone. This man owns 2 bulls in a residential neighborhood, she shouted. You're all ignoring that because you're too distracted by the 5 lies. Licenses are on file with the county, I replied. Animal controls cleared me twice. You keep bringing up the bulls because it's all you have. Her voice broke. They don't belong here. And that's when Rustam made his entrance. Not aggressive, not charging, just calm and massive, standing behind the fence at the edge of the center. I'd brought him in his trailer partly because I knew she'd spiral, and partly because I'd guessed what she'd do next. Karen turned, her face drained. You brought that thing here. He's legal, I said, quiet, calm, leashed. Want to inspect him? Karen stepped forward, then did exactly what I was waiting for. She grabbed the bull prod from her coat pocket and lunged. But Rustam didn't even flinch. The prod sparked once and then failed. My device had fried it the moment it got close. Karen stumbled forward and fell. Right in front of half the neighborhood. Gasps rang out. Phones were recording. Rahul quietly picked up the prod and looked at her. Karen, that was assault. On private livestock. During a public meeting, no one needed a vote. The board didn't even finish the session. Karen was done. Karen was done. Karen didn't show her face. For 3 days, when the board officially removed her. The announcement was curt. Effective immediately, Karen Monroe is relieved of all HOA duties pending further legal review. A special committee will manage budget recovery and community rebuilding efforts. No mention of the prod. No mention of Rustam, but everyone knew. I stayed quiet. I didn't post. I didn't gloat. I kept tending to the bulls, cleaned the barn, and let the silence do what no words ever could. But the silence didn't last long. The committee began. Unraveling Karen's digital trail. 1 folder turned into 10. 10 turned into hundreds. Most were useless, renamed images, half-finished plans, spam. But one file stuck out. It was buried in a private server folder labeled Contingency, Stage 2. Rahul called me personally. We found something strange, he said. I think you need to see it. When I arrived at the small makeshift HOA office inside the clubhouse, he handed me a printed document, just 2 pages. The first page had a diagram. It was a property zoning map, but one that didn't match the real community layout. On this version, several lots were color-coded in red. Mine was highlighted. Others were labeled convertible. The second page had a title, Projected Acquisition and Redevelopment, Plan High-Yield Livestock Restrictions and Smart Plot Buyback Program. At the bottom, in faded ink, Thermo Haven Group Proposal, Pending HOA Legal Update. Phase Q1. I read it again. Slower, wait, I said. This wasn't just about climate control. She was planning to force certain residents out. Rahul nodded. She was setting up the HOA to start repurposing plots under climate-friendly development loopholes. Your property, because of the bulls, was phase 1. Once you broke any bylaw, she'd invoke an environmental clause. Then offer a forced buyout at reduced value. I sat back, stunned. She was going to make us think it was all about smells and noise, I muttered, but she wanted the land. Rahul turned his laptop screen toward me. The HOA email server was open. Dozens of emails were being cross-referenced. One from a real estate developer caught my eye. Once pilot phase completes, we'll present offers for Bologna's land. Climate leverage is strong. Offer low target legal exhaustion first. So this wasn't just Karen, she had partners. Suddenly, the prod incident didn't feel like her unraveling, it felt like a delayed panic. Maybe she had realized her plan was running out of time. Maybe someone behind the scenes was applying pressure. You think they're still watching? I asked quietly. I know they are, Rahul replied. He showed me one more file, an email from 2 days ago, sent from a domain with no name. Phase 2 assets are exposed. Contain the narrative. If locals won't play nice, escalate until public interest drops. No sign-off, no source. But the message was clear. Karen might have fallen, but something bigger was still coming. That night, I sat with Sultan and Rustam. In the barn, the wind outside howled, like it knew what we were thinking. This wasn't over. Karen was only the gate. Someone else was behind the wall. For days, the neighborhood buzzed with a strange mix of relief and paranoia. Karen was gone, yes, but her shadow lingered in the form of uncertainty. People wanted answers. Closure, someone to blame beyond her. But the truth was harder to swallow. Karen was just the front. Rahul and I started digging deeper. We met at odd hours, reviewed flagged emails, and traced file names through remote company records. The further we went, the more surreal it became. Thermohaven LLC didn't exist in any traditional business directory. Its tax ID was real, but leased through a shell service based out of Nevada. That led us to a second firm, Civic Rebuild Group. And guess what they specialized in? Suburban redevelopment. Buy low, rezone fast. Flip to green tech corporations. Or luxury developers under the guise of eco-revitalization. Civic Rebuild had a playbook, and Karen had followed it like gospel. She'd been paid up front to be their anchor, to soften the neighborhood, provoke friction, and begin the slow burn of property devaluation. The climate tech. Fake the zoning pressure. Real. And my bulls. They were a problem. Big, visible, uncooperative. Bulls made noise. Bulls smelled. Bulls slowed down the story that this place could become a quiet, ecolux suburb full of uniform homes and silent lawns. I wasn't just their first target. I was the wedge.1 file from Civic Rebuild made it sickeningly clear. The bull owner is resistant to HOA conditioning. Push narrative of noncompliance. Force citations. Apply pressure until property becomes nuisance classified. I sat in Rahul's living room, the pages spread out on his coffee table, lit only by his desk lamp. He stared at them like they were foreign. I served on this board for 8 years, he said. Thought we were doing good? Community pride, safety, maintenance. I never imagined we were selling ourselves out from the inside. Not we, I said. Karen. He shook his head. There are more. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were campaign emails from another board member, Clara, the treasurer, offering to streamline compliance reports for faster transition to zoning upgrades. Her tone was polite, careful, but clear. She'd known so this was bigger than Karen. She'd lit the match, but others had handed her the gasoline. That night, Clara quietly resigned. No post, no apology. Just gone. But then things got worse. 2 mornings later, I stepped outside to check the barn. The latch was cut. The chain to the bull paddock had been severed clean through, lying in the frost-covered grass. Panic gripped my chest as I raced to the barn. Sultan and Rustam were inside, safe, but breathing heavy, spooked. Someone had tried to release them, not steal, not hurt, just loosen control. I called Rahul. This wasn't vandalism, I said. They were trying to cause an incident. If your bulls had gotten loose, they'd call it a safety threat, I finished. Force and animal removal. Emergency hearing. Fast-track rezoning. We both went silent. The gloves were off now. Whoever remained behind the curtain wasn't hiding anymore. They didn't care about Karen, they didn't care about rules. They wanted my land and they were willing to start a stampede to get it. The very next day, I installed new locks, steel hinges, and triple-thick chains across every entrance of the barn. But deep down, I knew that wouldn't stop them. Not this kind of threat. These weren't pranksters, this was pressure with purpose. I filed a police report. Submitted surveillance footage showing a dark vehicle pausing near my fence at 3:18 a.m. and even gave the responding officer a copy of the Civic Rebuild documents. He glanced through them, shook his head. This goes above HOA politics, he muttered. Someone's playing a game with big stakes. He was right, but I wasn't going to play defense anymore. That night, I hosted something unexpected. Bull meet and greet, community open barn day. I printed flyers, posted to our neighborhood app, and even handed them out at the mailbox row. The title was silly, but the purpose was real. It was time the residents saw the bulls up close. Not as Karen's distorted monsters, but as part of our community. To my surprise, they came. Families, retirees, even residents who'd once grumbled about manure and noise. They stepped into my backyard, saw Rustam calmly chewing hay. Let their kids pet Sultan's thick, warm-necked up, and then I showed them what was really at stake. Inside the barn, I set up a display table with the Thermohaven plans, the zoning maps, and the staged buyout proposals. I had printed sections and highlighted names, Clara's included. People stared, some gasped. This was about our land. They were going to turn the greenbelt into condos. Wait, I'm on the convertible plot list. The mood shifted from curiosity to fury, and that's when I made my final move. The following morning, I submitted a proposal to the HOA committee, now run entirely by neutral or new board members. It was titled, Community Agricultural Preservation Plan for Designation as Historic. Microfarm status. The plan included full legal protection of my livestock under local agricultural exemption clauses, monthly community education days with the bulls, a historical preservation narrative. My property was formerly part of a cattle route in the 1940s, a documented fact. A full opt-out clause for any HOA, interference in zoning for properties with registered livestock. Within days, I had signatures from 61% of homeowners by the end of the week. The City Zoning Commission called to verify the historical documents. They approved it. My land was untouchable. And it didn't stop there. 3 other homeowners, inspired by the fight, registered their own properties under eco-coop microagriculture, turning their side yards into beekeeping, native plant growth, and even urban gardening plots. All legal, all protected. The civic rebuild plan collapsed under its own weight. Developers pulled out quietly. A month later, the final email came to the HOA inbox, Phase Q1 212 deemed no longer viable. Exit strategy advised. Shut down all contractor pipelines. Scrub HOA associations from record. They were gone. Like ghosts in a data trail. And as for Karen, she sold her house under a trust name and vanished. No one's heard from her since, but Sultan and Rustam, still here, still munching hay, still the quiet kings of the neighborhood. Sometimes kids come by with apples. Sometimes old neighbors bring folding chairs just to sit and watch, and every now and then, someone will stop, look at the bulls, and say, I can't believe they tried to take this away. And I'll smile, because in the end, it wasn't just about the bulls, it was about standing your ground for hooves at a time.